hear you.
Thank you. I'm sure what I was saying was very, very brilliant. Will never be. Okay, can you hear and see me now? That was not what was supposed to happen there. All right, that's weird. I may need to reformat something here. Okay, we're talking about retrospectives today. In the chat, let me post it here one more time before that little. So there should be a poll everywhere box that pops up in WebEx. If not, you can just click on the poll everywhere button there. Also, there's a link to TidyCal. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but a lot of you probably got emails for anyone that's interested in getting a half hour just to chat about anything related to Agile. When I'm working with coaching clients, a lot of time we set up things on a regular basis where we're meeting once a week to just discuss how Agile is going. So this is a chance for you to see what that would be like. Would love to talk to you about Agile, music, anything you want to talk about. Just want to get together and talk. Click on that link. There's some time available. You guys have almost completely booked out Thursdays, like back to back. It's going to be a really exciting day. But I think there's a few more this afternoon and then some on Friday. And there may be just a few slots left on Thursday. So if you're interested in getting together and talking, that's the link for you. Okay, so let's talk about retrospectives. What is the goal of retrospectives? So why does your team do a retrospective? And you probably have been voting on this. If you haven't, go ahead and go to that and let's see what you think. So because we don't do retrospectives, so that takes care of that. Because Scrum says to, that's a popular reason I've seen a lot of times for doing retrospectives. Because the Agile Manifesto says we should regularly reflect. That's probably a slightly better reason. The last one here, because the Scrum Master makes us do them, is a very legitimate reason. There's lots of people doing retrospectives that don't feel like they're getting value from it, but the Scrum Master says to do it, so they're going to do it because it makes they'll make their lives miserable if they don't do the retrospectives. But here we got 50% of us are doing it because everyone finds them valuable, and I would say that's the best reason to be doing a retrospective. If we're doing a retrospective because Scrum says to or because the Agile Manifesto says to, that might be a good starting point. But if people aren't finding them valuable, then we need to look at ways that we can change what we're doing in order to make them valuable, because it should be valuable to everybody. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So everyone should find the retrospectives, misspelled that, valuable. Retrospectives should be a chance for us to make improvements. So that's what the Agile Manifesto says, is that we're reflecting on how we can improve things. So a couple things to think about when we're thinking of retrospectives. To make retrospectives valuable, we need to be doing things that are within the locus of control. If it's outside of our locus of control that we can't actually change, then it's not so much a retrospective about improving things. So you may have been in a situation like this, not sure if this is a retrospective or just a group of people complaining about stuff. Anyone ever experienced something that's maybe more on the just a bunch of people coming in? No, you don't have to necessarily raise your hand, but I'm glad to know I'm not the only one that's found myself in that situation. So next piece of retrospective is we want to make sure that we're choosing wisely. I got a text from someone that was, I'm not copying the text exactly, but it was something along kind of in this vein of saying, just want to see how the retrospective went. I was on vacation or something. And they said, we decided to make a few improvements. Like, great. We're going to focus on hours logged instead of working code. And then we're going to stop all forms of face-to-face communication. So the goal of a retrospective is to make improvements, but we also have to be careful to make sure that we're choosing what we're doing wisely and also doing it in a way that we're actually getting feedback on it. Make sure that we're doing things that are actually giving us feedback on whether we're improving or not. If the goal is to make improvements, it's not just a chance to go randomly change things and then ignore whether it's actually made life better or not. So yes, in this particular case, he chose poorly. So what's some examples of choosing wisely? So here's some things I've seen teams do. My dog just is rolling around on the floor at my feet. Good girl. Okay, some things that would be choosing wisely. Having a group lunch with another team you need to coordinate with. So I've seen teams do this. They say, hey, we're not getting great communication with this other team. We really need to coordinate closely. Let's get together for a pop and popcorn or for lunch or an after hours or something just to help build that relationship so we can both support each other better. Another thing, chosen wisely. So Rich has got a good question here. Is it okay to let teams make poor choices, even anti-agile choices, and let them learn from their mistakes? I think the key there is to make sure that you're setting up an environment where you can actually learn from the mistakes and you'll know if it's not working. And so that's something as a coach, usually what I'm trying to do is encourage people to try things in retrospectives, but one, ideally try things that have a good probability of working, but also try things that we can measure and know if they're working or not. Because if it's not something if it's something that has a low probability of working and is impossible to measure, we may just be stuck with something because somebody chose to do it. So you want to let teams learn, but you need to make sure that you're doing it in a way that lets you actually learn. So if I've got a team that I'm working with that's really bent on trying to do something that I think is a bad idea, I want to make sure that we try to frame it like, okay, let's try this. What's the period of time we want to try it for? And how would we know if it makes things better or not? How would we know if it makes things worse? And because if we don't have that, we're just randomly changing things. So another thing would be choosing wisely. Agreement on when to escalate blockers. A lot of times teams are slowing down because they hit some type of blocker and they're really not sure what to do next or when it becomes a big enough impediment to raise up. And that's where you have issues where you get to the end of the sprint and something didn't get finished, and you really find out that something that happened at the beginning of the sprint was actually impeding stuff, but no one knew who to ask about it. So those are great things to come up in retrospectives of, hey, this wasn't working very well. It seems to be slowing us down. Let's try this other approach, or let's bring this other person into the loop when this type of thing happens. Agreement on how to communicate breaking changes. This is something I've seen come up with teams that are iterating rapidly. There's, particularly if you've got different groups that aren't necessarily working in the same team room, you're going to get in situations where somebody made a change, pushed it out to the environment, someone else didn't know they made that change, can't figure out why the environment isn't working, and spends 2 days digging through their code to try to figure out what went wrong. That type of thing happens if we don't have a good way of kind of communicating what's getting pushed out, particularly if we don't have tests built around it. So those are things that come up in retrospective of, hey, this is slowing us down, it's kind of painful, let's have an agreement of something we want to try, and we'll see if it works better if we communicate these changes. What if we, if you think you broke the staging environment, put it in this team chat so everybody can see it, just so everybody's on the same page. It's not that it's a bad thing, it's going to happen, but let's make sure we communicate that. That would be a wise thing to try to come out of a retrospective. Creating an experiment for the next sprint to see if it improves flow. A lot of these fall under that, of being an experiment. A decision to try to have a second daily stand-up. So this one sounds kind of funny. Let me explain there was a specific situation. I was working with a team and they were having daily stand-ups that worked pretty well. They were getting lots of stuff done. But they also had to interface with another group of people, and those people were being asked to be part of the daily stand-up, which was great because everybody was there for everything that needed to be discussed. The problem was about 75% of the things being discussed weren't really relevant to the other team that was more the system admin side of things. So what this team decided to try is they said, hey, we appreciate you coming to these meetings. It's really, really valuable for us. But we realize that we've got a lot of discussion that's not necessarily things you need to know about. What would you think about having a 15-minute meeting? We'll do a stand-up mainly focused on you. We'll do it right after the stand-up that we do. Would you be willing to try that and see if it makes life better for you? In this particular case, they did, and the system administrators thought it was great because then everything was more focused on what they were talking about. It was easier for the rest of the team because they had a little bit more space to go ahead and discuss things in more depths that were more just relevant to the team. But that all started out as an experiment of what would happen if we had this second meeting that was more focused on these people that are very important, that we need to touch base with every day, but may not need to know the details more on the software engineering side. They're more on the deployment and the system side. So that was a very wise thing for them to try, and they tried a couple different things. I think they moved the time around and eventually got to a point where they're like, yes, this works. We think it works well as a team. Our partners that we're working with say it works well for them, so this is a good thing to try. The first thing, I can't remember the very first thing they tried, but it took some iteration, but it was an experiment they tried and led to a very, very good outcome for them. Yes, if it makes things worse, how do we roll back the change? There are some types of changes you can do that aren't necessarily easy to recover from. And so you want to make sure that you're experimenting with things that are not catastrophic. What happens if the whole team eats this poison? Will it make us better as a developer? Well, that's not a good experiment. Probably goes without saying. Okay, here's some examples of things that could be chosen poorly. So consensus that Hal from the security team is an idiot. So if this is what comes out of your retrospective, this wasn't a productive retrospective, right? Just this falls into the just complaining about someone. That's not going to get you anywhere. A decision to work on something other than what the customer wants without telling the customer. And this sounds crazy. I've been on teams that have more or less done this. It said the customer says they're asking for this, but we think they really want this thing over here. But instead of actually having a conversation with them, we're just going to do it anyway. Which did not end well for the team. So that was chosen poorly. Agreement to stop being transparent with management or customers. And I've seen conversations come up where that is being proposed as what's coming out of the retrospective because something was painful in the sprint. And like, well, if they didn't know about it, then it wouldn't be painful. That's not chosen wisely as far as something that could be improved coming out of a retrospective. So another big piece of retrospective that I find very, very valuable are kudos. So giving people kudos. So a chance in a retrospective, we're talking about finding ways to experiment of different things we want to do to make things better, but also recognizing the things that have gone well. So I would say every retro should have some opportunity to give kudos, give thumbs up, give high five to people that have done things that really benefited the team or benefited anyone on the team. And this is really, really valuable because to help establish trust within the team, if you can recognize, if I'm on a team and I know that people are recognizing what I've been putting effort into, I have a much higher level of trust than if I think it's just, no one cares. I'm going to be much more engaged with the team where I've gotten a couple people say, hey, thanks for doing this way, and recognized it in front of people. So when I'm working with teams, as a coach, I'll usually try to make sure that we've got a column that we're representing kudos on or a place to put the sticky notes as part of the retrospective. And then I usually do my best to try to sit there. Matter of fact, this is usually where, as a coach, I'm usually spending most of my time of the stuff I'm writing is trying to get kudos up there for every single person I can think of that did something that was helpful to the team that we want to make sure that we recognize. And the thing about doing that is once you start putting things up, it makes other people remember things. And so I go ahead and encourage us to read through those. And oftentimes somebody will say, yeah, Joe helped do this and it really helped me do this. Thanks, Joe. That was really incredible. And then usually other people will speak up and said, oh yeah, I didn't realize Joe did that. Is that why that's so much better? Thanks, Joe. That made my life a lot better too. So this is a huge, very important part of retrospectives. And oftentimes it's the part that just gets kind of added at the end or we don't think of. But we're not just trying to focus on things that went poorly. We're wanting to focus on things that went well too, because we can improve by taking something that's not going well and making it better. But we can also really improve by taking things that went well and doing more of that thing that actually worked. My dog has just discovered that I'm on the screen in front of me and she's not sure why I'm there. So this is interesting. If something blips out, it's probably because she yanked a wire out she wasn't supposed to. Okay, back to running a retrospective. So when should we do a retrospective? And so this I wanted to just kind of poll, see how often does your team do a retrospective? What is this for you? Is it every day, every week, every 2 weeks, once a month, only when something really bad happens? And there is not necessarily a right answer here. Some of these are probably worse for a lot of people, but like only when something bad happens probably is not a great thing for team morale. So let's talk about this. So it's interesting. No one's actually doing it every week. That's interesting. So most of us are doing it. Looks like around every 2 weeks, which makes sense because a lot of us are probably doing this. We're doing 2-week sprints, I'm guessing, and so there's kind of that cadence happening. 2 week. Okay, somebody found that every 2 weeks resulted in repetitive feedback. So that's an interesting point. And I think it's good to point out that Agile doesn't say you need to have retrospectives every 2 weeks. It just means it says you need to do it regularly. I was working with one team, and I was the Agile coach, and I realized we had not done a retrospective for, it had been like 3 or 4 months, and this team was performing great. And I was, so they were doing great, and I realized, I'm failing as an Agile coach because I haven't pushed for doing a retrospective. So I've got this in the back of my mind about how I'm a failure with this team. They're doing great, but because I didn't get them to do a retrospective, I'm a failure with the team. And then we had our daily stand-up, and in part of the stand-up, somebody said, hey, we're having trouble working with this other piece of the organization here. Is there anyone that can help us with that? And somebody said, I think I may be able to help you with that. They said, okay, after the stand-up, everybody just stick around that wants to help with that, and we will work through this and figure out what's going on, find a way to make this work better. And that was it. Took about 15 seconds to have that conversation just as part of the daily stand-up. And what I realized is this team had gotten to the point that whenever there was an issue, they would do these mini retrospectives and just get the people together that knew about it or were able to participate in improving it, and they just solved the problem. And they had built up enough trust with each other and enough kind of repetitive practice of everybody being on the same page of what they're trying to accomplish for that to be a very, very natural thing that they were doing. And so I realized that it wasn't that we weren't doing retrospectives, we just hadn't done a formal one where we set aside time just for doing that and went through more of a formal process. Now, we did go ahead and do one after a while, but for this team, doing a formal retrospective every 2 weeks probably wouldn't have been very useful because anything that came up, they had probably dealt with already. Now, the formal retrospective, actually some other things came up in that we needed to talk about that weren't coming up as part of these just whenever there's an issue. So the reason I tell that story is there's lots of different ways teams will do retrospectives. If you've got a team that's just forming or that doesn't have a real high level of trust, the formal retrospectives can help establish that and help maybe work through some things that won't just happen naturally. It's probably, if you've got teams that are remote and not actually using virtual team rooms, doing formal retrospectives is probably even more important because it's harder for those things to happen as naturally as they do if you're in person. So every day, that's great. We got some people doing that. Cool. And we got some people doing, okay, we do have some people doing every week. Cool. Every 2 weeks, that's a cadence. Once a month, so I think I'm guessing the person that said that they found every 2 weeks was too repetitive, or is probably doing it once a month. One thing to think about, though, is if you get to the point that the retrospective is getting repetitive, you can do them less frequently. Another thing you might consider is you might just time box them more and try to get less time and see if that helps your team find the biggest pain point. Because if you're able to find the biggest pain point that in the last 2 weeks or whatever that period of time was and come up with something that you're wanting to try, that might be more valuable than just saying we're going to do a big retrospective and do it less frequently. It depends on the team. But particularly if you're doing an experiment and then looking at feedback on the experiment, if you wait too long between them or you don't have some way that feedback's being discussed again that's outside of the retrospective, you might head down a path too long, or you might try something thinking we're just going to try this and see if it works and then forget to actually check if it works, and it just becomes part of the culture of the team whether it works or not. So there's not a right or wrong here. Those are just some things to consider. Okay, who should attend? So you guys stand up, or you've got your retrospective. Oftentimes, you've got lots of people interested in being part of the retrospective. So you've got, management and stakeholders and, security and the front desk and your dog asking, can I come to your retrospective? And so I want to ask, who do you guys think should be asked to attend a retrospective? So this is a good point. So doing retrospectives at different levels. There are things the team is going to discuss if it's just the team. If you got 5 developers and the product owner they're working with every day, or whoever represents the customer, maybe some testers, a small group, there's stuff that they're going to bring up that they're probably not going to bring up if you bring the CEO from the company in. So I think having retrospectives at different levels, I think, can be very, very useful as long as you're not getting into way too many meetings for it to be productive anymore. So here's the thing: who should be asked to be on retrospective? Just the team, but including product owner, anyone on the team, core team, whole team, all team members, agile team. And these can be correct in any different circumstance. What I think, if I'm thinking in terms of how do I get a team to where a team can deliver, I want to get the people involved in the retrospective that are part of the people that are involved in what they're delivering, ideally something that they're delivering every few days. Because we want to talk through how we're able to up our delivery capability, and we need to make sure we've got the people there that can actually participate in that. So the people the team is working with on a daily basis to deliver, which should include somebody that's representing the customer in some way, maybe the product owner. Ideally, it's somebody that actually uses the software or is representing the users of the software. You probably need somebody that's representing testing as part of it. If you've got testers as part of the team that delivers, but it can look different depending on what your delivery increment and unit is. But what you don't want to do, two extremes that you don't want. You don't want to have everyone, a bunch of people that aren't really bought into aren't really part of the day-to-day, here's how we deliver software. If you have too many people that are falling on that side of things, it's going to be harder for the team to focus on how do they improve their, what they're doing in each iteration that they're delivering. It also might make the team less likely to speak up because lots of people out there. On the other hand, if you exclude people from it, and let's say you just have the developers meet, you're going to miss out on how you're actually able to work together as a whole. So you need to think in terms of how do we deliver this and who do we need here to actually have the, good point, Ian. The retro is about team effectiveness, so you need those people there. If you become too exclusive in who you have, you're going to have just one. If you're so exclusive that you don't have the perspective of the people necessary to deliver the software, you're probably going to miss out on big pieces that you need to actually deliver. So if I've just got the developers, but we don't think about anyone that's responsible for figuring out what the stories need to do or how the software gets deployed, I'm going to get a very one-sided view of how to improve things. So it needs to be big enough that you can look at how you're able to actually improve your cycle time and the flow of value all the way through, but small enough that you're not getting into too many things that are irrelevant. So that's not an answer that one is right and one is wrong, but that's what you need to really think about. Are you at the right scale for improving the team? So how long should we schedule for a retrospective? And as we mentioned, some of this can depend on how frequently you're doing it. I saw somebody mention they found longer, less frequently, let them get more in depth on things, which is great. That's great if that's what you found works well for your team. But how long are your retrospectives? Somebody said maximum 3 hours. In 1 hour, okay. So it looks at, like most of us are 40 to 60 minutes, are kind of in that type of range, which is pretty typical. And usually I see the 40 to 60 minutes being when people are trying to do things every 2 weeks. If you're doing it every day, 40 to 60 minutes is probably too much. If you're doing it once a month, 40, 60 minutes might not be long enough. So here's some signs that your retrospective might be too long, right? If you see a lot of this, it might be a sign that your retrospective is going on way too long. Here was an idea of how to make your meetings, but retrospectives shorter. So you have everybody plank as part of it, and you'll have very, very fast retrospective. This might not be the most optimal way of doing things. My kids and I, we were listening to Lord of the Rings a while back, going through that series, listening to the audio version of it, and we came up with this great idea that we should plank during the songs, because every once in a while there'll be, the elves sing the song or something like that. You have no idea how many songs there are in Lord of the Rings and how long they are unless you try to plank during every time a song comes on. So this is an idea to make your retrospective short too, maybe. But the point is the meeting should be long enough that you're able to discuss things, but short enough that people aren't falling asleep. You're probably better off. For most teams, there's lots of things you could talk about. And so part of what you're trying to do in a retrospective is figure out what's most important to people and try to solve those things And that should probably be a bigger goal for you than trying to solve all the things that people could potentially talk about. You want to find the low hanging fruit, the things that give you the best return on investment, and try some experiments to address those. And next time you do a retrospective, then something else may have bubbled up. Once you solve the stuff that was the biggest problem last iteration, maybe something else is the biggest problem this time, or maybe you caused another problem, right? So who runs the retrospective? So just type it in the chat. Who do you guys find runs the retrospective on yours? Okay, the Scrum Master. Anyone who cares? Anyone who cares? Okay, that's cool. We got manager. Okay, see, some people are trying to do it as a rotation. I think that's great. Scrum Master, team coach. So it looks like most of us are having most of us are in situations where the Scrum Master is doing it. And this kind of brings up a question: is what does it actually mean to run a retrospective? And I'll give you an idea of what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean you're saying I've scheduled this retrospective to tell you everything you're doing wrong. If you got some type of dynamic that's causing this is not a team retrospective. And the cat was not hurting the dog here. They're best friends and they do chew on each other a little bit, but they like each other, so the dog's fine. So what is a retrospective? The person running it, what are they going to be doing? They're going to be time boxing stuff, right? Keeping things moving. And so if you think of who's running a retrospective, mostly it should be the team doing stuff. But having somebody that's trying to make sure that we're keeping moving is a very good thing. So this is one of the things it means to run a retrospective. Guiding constructive discussions, particularly if you're in a situation where you've got a newish team that might not be used to doing retrospectives, having someone, and this is a role I play often as a coach, Scrum Master plays this a lot of time, is trying to make sure that we're headed toward things that are productive, right? If we're just talking about how horrible Hal is in security, that's not constructive discussion. So somebody that can kind of veer that back toward how can we talk about making progress moving forward? How can we talk about things that are actually under our control? Yes, Hal may be a horrible person, but what can we do to actually make things better that we have control over? So the person leading the Scrum discussion, or I'm sorry, leading the retrospective, this is one of the things that you may need them to be doing. They should also be trying to get people to engage. Once again, this is something that if you got a very mature team, this probably shouldn't be much of an issue. But when you're just starting, trying to make sure that trying to make sure that retrospectives don't become a point where you hear from the 50% that are louder and don't hear anything from the 50% that are a little bit quieter. So it could be a great chance for people to go, the person leading the retrospective might find that it's better to try to ask around the room, or find somebody that's looking there thinking about it, and give them a chance, give them some space to actually answer some questions. Getting everybody to engage also can be trying to steer the conversation to be about the problem, not about a particular person. So like avoiding situations where someone might feel that they're being attacked. And trying to think of a great example of this, but just kind of if I've been working on something and I've worked on it so long that it's part of my identity, that this is important to me because this was my plan, it's my baby, and somebody starts attacking that, it's very easy for me to take it as me personally, that I'm being attacked. It's also very easy for the person, if they know it was all my idea, to start making, to discuss the problem in terms of me because I'm so closely associated with it. So getting people engaged means trying to make sure that you can keep everything on the table of the problems you're trying to solve, while trying to separate that from the people that may have been big proponents of that in the past. So that these are the roles. Now, the reason going through these and thinking of who runs it, the ideal situation is to get into where anyone on the team can run it, and maybe having it rotate through, or just ask somebody who would like to run the stand-up this week, or this iteration or month, or whatever it is. And if you've got teams that have experienced it before, are comfortable with each other, you ought to find some people that are interested in trying to do that. If you're the coach or the Scrum Master, you might help provide support to them of helping make sure they get everything together. But it's a very reasonable thing to ask for the team to do that. Now, one thing I've seen sometimes is where you bring in an outsider, and I've done this for teams before as well. There are some advantages of this. There are some disadvantages of this. Oftentimes, this happens when you've got more of a post-mortem going on, where you're trying to, like, something went wrong, so we're having a meeting. The advantage of this is it might be helpful to have a neutral voice or somebody that maybe doesn't know all the details and can kind of steer toward. So when I say bring in an outsider, what I'm talking about is bringing in like an Agile coach. Like, we've got a coach that's coming in, doesn't directly work with the team. They don't really have a vested interest in, or not, they don't have any preconceived ideas. They're just here to facilitate a good meeting. I think there are places where that can be useful. I don't think it's what you want to have to be doing every time. Somebody coming in as an Agile coach or an outsider facilitator of the meeting, let's call it that, may be able to get people to participate in ways that wouldn't work as well if it was people within the team. Sometimes there's sometimes fewer personal feelings involved, and you might be able to bring somebody in that's very skilled at navigating things and steering away from problematic decisions or things that will paint people, where the team could paint themselves into a corner. So this could be, like, for example, I've seen sometimes, Shelly's talking about having done some of this. I've seen sometimes where Scrum Masters actually switch teams, and they said, why don't you come facilitate retrospective for my team, and I can observe and just participate, and then I'll do one for you so you can observe and participate. That can be advantageous too, particularly if you've got a Scrum Master that wants to actually participate as a participant, but they don't feel they can because they're trying to, run everything. And if they start talking too much, it will make it to where it's their position as the facilitator makes it harder for them to actually participate on the level as just a participant in it. So that's an idea as well. So what do you do with your retrospective takeaways? So this is something similar. So you get a retrospective, you come up with 2 things you want to try to improve. What happens next? Some of the things I've seen teams do is they actually create a story for specific things they're trying to do and get it on the backlog. That can be valuable, particularly if it's something very much, we want to do X, Y, and Z. We want to make sure that everyone has this particular security access on their laptops. So we're going to create a ticket for it and then make sure everybody says they have it, because we've determined that not having that access is the thing that's really holding us up, and we can get it. We just haven't gotten it for everybody. That can be a great thing to have a story for, to say, okay, yes, we've done it. Now, I caution on some of that because you really want your stories focused on what you're delivering for the customer, but in some environments, that's a great way to do it. One thing, I've been in some teams, they're like, oh, we need to, at each retrospective, we need to make sure that we did the stuff in the last retrospective, and make sure that's clear, that exactly what happened. And that's the first thing we talk about, is what did we say we were going to do last time? The advantage of that is you can talk through, if you had any experiments, and say, how did this go? Do we want to keep doing it? That's great. On the other hand, there's some things that are a little bit more soft, like we want to try to develop a better relationship with this team by, let's try to sit and have lunch with them or something like that. If you see them, let's invite them, or let's just try to start increasing our communication with them, or something that's a little bit more soft in what you're doing, and maybe isn't something that's going to be a ticket or necessarily even an experiment that you're going to be able to say, we did this and here were the results. You can get into a place where you spend all your time on the next retrospective talking about the previous one. And one thing to consider is what was most important last retrospective was most important at the time. If this retrospective, there may be something else more important. So if we spend too much time focusing on what we were doing in the past, maybe it kind of fell off and it wasn't an issue anymore and we don't really care. If it does become more important, it should keep bubbling up until we find some way to deal with it. So the systems where you got really, really formal of saying, how have we done things? Have we done this? And extensive tracking of stuff. Sometimes those can be a little bit counterproductive, and it might be, in some circumstances, it makes sense to be a little bit more, think of the word, just kind of going with the flow, with the idea of things will keep coming up until we solve them. It's okay if we didn't get solved last retrospective. If it's the most important thing, it'll come back up to the top. There might be something else that's most important now, and that's fine. That's just part of the way we work. Okay. Oh, the other thing I've seen people do is it's like, hey, we need to try to do this. We want to try. Our stand-ups are running too long. Let's say that's an example of something. Because people feel they're going longer than what the value is they're getting out. How can we try to keep them short? Well, let's try to keep each other accountable to try to keep the stand-ups shorter. Well, that might be a great thing when you start your stand-up to say, okay, remember we talked about in a retrospective, we want to keep this laser focus. So with that in mind, go. Let's start. So a lot of times retrospective items, bringing them up at the beginning of the daily stand-up on a regular basis, if it's something just we want to try to do this a little better or try to limit this or do more of this, bringing those up as far as the daily stand-up and making sure everybody's thinking about it at the beginning of the stand-up each week, even for things that don't just happen in the stand-up, that can be one way, that can be a good thing to do with your retro takeaway is like, hey, here's something we're trying to improve. Remember, this is what we're trying to work on, and this iteration is trying to deal with these particular things, and here's how we said we were going to do it. Okay, so there's some ideas, and now a quick word from our sponsor, which happens to be Xeric Corporation, which happens to be my family's business. So I usually put the stuff at the beginning. I'm just going to throw it here in the middle before we jump back into things. Most of you probably know this, but I'm going to put this out because some people are probably joining the stand-ups or joining these meetings that haven't ever worked directly with me. Our company does Agile coaching and training. We do where we're doing, well, matter of fact, a lot of these talks are things that we use for going in and doing training with companies. As part of trying to address specific things. So coaching and training where it's like not working full-time with a team, but coming in and doing training, sometimes coaching with management and doing training with the team, as well as doing like both on the Agile side of things and oftentimes with behavior-driven development or test-driven development and DevOps and engineering practices like that. I also do a lot of embedded technical coaching where I'm working with teams and working with them daily to help deliver the software while bringing Agile coaching along just as part of trying to deliver the software, which that's a lot of fun. And it's the most effective way I found for coaching teams because you're able to model it and you're also able to help deliver the software, which is the goal. So it's very, very integrated. We also do, and some people don't know we do this, software engineering. So we write software, particularly for kind of startups and small companies where they may not have the capacity or expertise for a particular thing, or just need some augmented help. They've got something they're trying to get out the door and deliver, but they just don't have the capacity for it. So we've got a developer I've been working with for years that works for our company for years, and so he and I usually work on that side of things, bringing the full scale of Agile practices to delivering rapidly for a company. And then, so here's my email address. You probably have that, but if any of that sounds interesting, please don't hesitate to reach out. Also, through the end of this week, I have some slots on my calendar where we are doing 30 minutes to talk to you about Agile or anything that you find interesting. I will throw that link in there. So if any of you would like to get 30 minutes on my calendar, there's still some slots left this week. I had a whole bunch coming in yesterday. Thursday, it must be the day people have time available because it really, really filled up. But anyway, if you're interested in that, there's the link. You probably got an email about it. I sent it out to a kind of a subset. But if you're on this call and you're interested, click on that link I just threw into the chat. And I would grab some time on the calendar. I'd love to talk to you about brainstorm about any challenges that you're having with Agile. Some of the things people have asked about in the recent one is brainstorming about challenges they're having in Agile, like even some things of, we've got this particular person on the team. Here's the, we've got this particular person on the team. Here's what's happening. How can we get them more engaged and more aligned with the team? So we talked through some things to try to, ways that they might be able to do to improve that relationship and bring this person along to try to get them performing well for their own sake, but also for the team's sake. Another thing I've had quite a few people ask about is people that are trying to make it some type of career transition. So a lot of people that I've talked to in the last week, people that were looking at career transition, say, well, what would it look like to go from being a Scrum Master to more being an Agile coach? And so we were able to talk through what some of those things would look like. I'm not the expert on all things career, but I have worked with a lot of people in different capacities. So we talked through some things that might be good things to have in her wheelhouse for job interviews and things going forward. Also have people just asking, technical stuff. Hey, we're trying to do this. Have you ever seen these two things work together? Because it's not working for us. And sometimes I've got little test environments that we can look at things like that. So anyway, if any of that sounds interesting, or you want to talk about dog training or anything else, music, education, anything else, click on that link at the TidyCal and grab a slot, and I would love to talk to you. Okay, moving on and back to our regular programming here. Okay, next week, or no, not back to regular programming, so this is still part of my ad, right? So next week, Ryan Ladd is going to be joining us to talk about work in progress, so whip into shape. And he's talking about how he's, some things he's done with teams to get dramatically better cycle time and faster flow by really kind of manipulating the work in progress limit in order to get stuff through quickly. So this is going to be really interesting. Really enjoy hearing what Ryan has to say. So I'm very excited about this one. And then I think 2 weeks after that, this one isn't up on the calendar yet, but it is coming. Nayan Hajratwala is going to be talking to us about testing in production, which sounds horrible, right? But I think this will be a very interesting talk. Talking about things you can do that allow you to test on your actual data in production in ways that are not catastrophic if you learn from the test that something's not working quite right. So it's going to be an interesting talk. That's coming up 2 weeks from next Tuesday, I think. Okay, so now back to our regularly scheduled program. Retrospective format ideas. Let me just check the chat really here. Oh, yes, and thank you, Shelley, for that shout out there. I appreciate that. Retrospective format ideas. So we've established retrospectives are valuable. We want to do retrospectives. How could we actually do these? Well, here's just some quick ideas of ways to do retrospectives. Often teams find things that work well for them, but sometimes they get stuck in ruts. So here's a few ideas. I've seen some people, they just put up on these are things that made me mad. These are things that made me glad. These are things that made me sad. And we'll put sticky notes underneath it for all the different things. Maybe glad is where we put our kudos. I like having kudos as a separate column to really call out that's what we're trying to do. Another thing, start, stop, and continue. So you put these up on the wall somewhere, or you can do it in spreadsheet, different things, and say, what are the things that we want to start doing? So let's get some ideas of things we want to start. So that might be an experiment we want to start trying. What are some things we're doing that we want to stop doing? It might be experiments that we want to say that didn't work, let's not do it anymore, or just changes to the way we're working where we think we can be more efficient by not doing something. And then continue, calling out the things where we're saying, here's the things that are working well, let's make sure that we recognize that it's working well or have a discussion about it and keep moving those forward. And oftentimes on these, a familiar way to do it is to go through and say, okay, put all the stuff up there, everybody gets so many votes, vote for it. We'll take the 2 things in each category that come to the top and talk through them. And that can be a good way to make sure the things that are most important to people, because I may put a bunch of stuff up here on the board that I'm just thinking of, but I might not vote for any of my own stuff because the other things up there might be much more interesting to me. I'm like, oh yeah, I think we should talk about that. Another idea, liked, learned, longed for, and lacked. So all the L's, right? Here's the things that I really liked about what we did in the last iteration. Here's the things we learned. Here's the things I wish we had, but we didn't. And here's the things that we're really missing from this. Do you talk about everything or what just the most voted for? I usually, if we're working on a time box and we're really focused on what's the most urgent thing, I'm usually encouraging people to go for the most voted for ones. It doesn't mean that the other ones aren't important, but they may not be the most important things. So oftentimes in many circumstances, I'm trying to encourage people to use this process to determine what collectively as a team we think is the most important, which doesn't mean, and this shouldn't be the only place we're talking about stuff, right? If there's something that's really important to me, then I can do the thing after stand-up time, sometimes saying, hey, here's something that's really making my life miserable. It didn't get voted up in the thing, that's fine. Does anyone can anyone join and talk to me about this? Let's find a way we can come up with an idea of how we could possibly improve this. So just because something doesn't get addressed in retrospective doesn't mean that you shouldn't address it. But by focusing on the stuff that kind of bubbles to the top, we can keep our time box down and keep the energy going. And one of the things is if there's something that's not important to very many people on the team, and we spend a lot of time talking about it with everyone, we're going to lose some of that energy of people participating. And if we've got, particularly if you've got a large team, trying to make sure that you're focused on things that are most interesting to the most of the team can be important. Doesn't mean you never want to address other things, but that's just something you've got to make sure that you're not on so many little rabbit trails, so many things that aren't important to the majority of the people that that you start losing their ability to stay engaged with it. Here's a starfish one I've seen. So you got things we want to keep, things we want to start, things we want to stop, things we want to do less of, and things we want to do more of. So you can draw a starfish on a board, give everybody sticky notes, and go to it. This one was kind of cute. I liked it's we've got a sailboat, and so we've got what's the wind, what's the thing that's really pushing us forward and letting us get things done. So the things we want to keep doing because they're really, really pushing us forward. Up here on the, and then the sun, the thing that's making us feel really good, right? What are the rocks, the things that we're going to we may run into and we need to watch out for? And then what's the thing that's slowing us down? So you've got somebody that's artistically inclined and you're in person, get somebody to draw something like this up on the board and then just put sticky notes wherever they think the things are. It's fun and it's visual and it gets people thinking about, what are these big blocks that are coming up? What's slowing us down? This is probably one of the more frequent one that I use, which is like what's things we want to get thumbs up, things we want to give a thumbs down, something along the lines of kudos. Here's the things that people want to call it, give a gold star to it, and then more of something we want to do, experiments we want to try. So usually when I'm using this type of format, we don't put anything here to start with. So we start with what's going well, what's not going well, and then out of that we start brainstorming of how can we make these things, how can we take the things that are working really well and then look at the things that aren't working well and use what we know about what works well to come up with some experiments to try to improve the things that aren't working well. And then we may list 4 or 5 things here and then vote. What do we want to try? We've got a bunch of ideas and they may all be great ideas, but collectively as a team, what do you want to try as an experiment? Mural is a very nice tool for doing some of this stuff. Another type of retrospective that's very different that I enjoy doing is give everybody on the team, this works well if you're in person, but works remotely as well, everybody on the team a deck of 12 cards that have each of each Agile principle. And then have them force rank it. So they end up with, at the very top are the things they say the team is doing the best at these things. And at the very bottom, they've got things of here's what the team's doing, the place we've got the most room for improvement. And then go around and say, okay, who has this in their top? Joe's got this in their top, and go through what it is. Virtual Agile coach, yes, he's got a lot of really interesting things for themed retrospectives and stuff. I think we've got him scheduled to be talking to us in a few months, and I think he's going to talk about retrospectives. I haven't got all the details worked out, so I'm excited about Chris Stone, I think, will be here. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I'll be watching for that one. Anyway, force rank the principles and then get people to talk about what are we doing really, really well? What are the things that we're struggling with? And what you'll find is a lot of times the things that one person says, this is what we're best at. Somebody else will say, oh yeah, that was in my lowest one. That's something I think we're not doing very well at all. And so those conversation really helps people see how there may be room to improve the way they're following the Agile principles collectively as a team. And then out of that, come up with some things like, here's the stuff that we kind of all agree we need the most work on. Let's come up with some experiments of how to improve that. So that's it's simple. Matter of fact, what I do is I went into some business card printer thing, and I've got 12 different business cards I could order, and you get 100 to 200 of each, and then have my kids go through and just pack them all together. And then I've got these set up so we can go in and let teams force rank them like that. You can also, you can use other tools like Minty and stuff like that to force rank things as well. I think having the papers actually works pretty well. So question, why use different formats? Some of the reasons that you might want to use different, Tar Queen, okay, that's interesting. Some of the reasons you might use different formats is what really appeals to one person, and I know this is something I think Chris Stone has leveraged a lot, is he'll do a Game of Thrones themed one, or one that's, Star Wars. Anyway, people that may not be very excited about another meeting, when you start really hitting their buttons of what's really important to them, you can get some people engaged that might not be as engaged under a regular thing. So making it fun is great. Using different formats gives you different views of things, so that can be very, very valuable. I also can pull people out of their shell a little bit. Like somebody might really respond to the sailboat one, but the thumb up, thumb down, they hardly participate at all. So changing things up keeps it interesting and hopefully gets people involved and lets you see different aspects of things. Retrospective tools, just real fast. Here's the ever-present wall and post-it notes. That's very, very valuable. I think that's a good thing to use if you can use it. There's a tool called Fun Retro that then got renamed Easy Retro because I guess it was hard to get corporate people to pay for a software as a service thing called Fun Retro. easy retro. They were able to sell it to more people. We've used that on some teams. It's been very useful. I see somebody put some in the chat too. Lots of different tools. The other thing I want to mention is just Google Docs can be really, really valuable of just having headings on each section of the software. Headings on each section in a Word document. People go type in what they're interested in. And then what I've done with teams is say, okay, pick a symbol. You know, okay, you're going to be the soccer emoji. That's great. And everybody vote for their thing with their symbol, so you can keep track of what you voted for. And then we'll kind of reshuffle it to put the stuff at the top that has the most votes. It can be very, very effective. I've seen teams get a lot of mileage out just using Google Docs. So lots of different ways to do it. Lots of tools out there for that. Okay, so let's get into what are we going to give away today? We're going to do a quick poll quiz here. Let's give away a t-shirt. If you don't have the thing up, it should show up in WebEx. We've got 5 questions. I'll post it there again. Okay, we're going to give away one of the Turn Your Video On t-shirts. I cleaned up and it's not here right now. It's over there. So you'll have to imagine what it looked like. So these t-shirts are things that I've used to encourage teams when they're working together in virtual team rooms and in daily stand-ups to get their video on so we can value face-to-face communication. So go ahead and join. You can win up to 1,000 points per answer. Speed does matter. And we will get started. I'll give you just one more second to join here. This one doesn't tell me how many people joined. Okay. 5 seconds left to join. 4, 3, 2, 1. First question. Improvements need to be things that are easy to do, not controversial, have a really high return on investment within the team's locus of control, or none of the above. What do improvements need to be? 2 seconds remaining, 1 second, and we're done. 41 people participating, and yes, so while we do probably want things that are high return on investment, the point we were making earlier is we need to keep the team focused on things that are within the team's locus of control. It's easy to have lots of ideas how the rest of the organization could change, but we want a retrospective focused on things that the team can actually do in order to try to take a step forward. Okay, we've got B. Johnson, Eric, Donna, and guest 304 in the top spots. What's the best reason to do a retrospective? Is it because it's part of Scrum? Because the Agile Manifesto says to regularly reflect and improve? Because successful teams do retrospectives? Or because the team finds it a useful way to improve? Or because the Scrum Master makes everyone do it? Yes, because the team finds it a useful way to improve. The other reasons could be good reasons, but the best reason is because the team's actually saying this is something that we find valuable. Okay, B. Johnson is still in first place. Nanga moves up to second place, followed by guest 304 and Will. Oh, we've got ties for these. Uh-oh, I'm doing good. I've got plenty of shirts if we end up with ties. Okay. What is a bad reason to have an outsider run a retrospective? Is it to avoid personal hurt feelings, to provide a neutral voice, to get more people to engage, or to report back to management what happened, or to help steer the conversation? So some of these are good. What's a bad reason to have an outsider run the retrospective? And yes, if you're having an outsider run the retrospective so they can go back and tell management about all the conversations and this person said this and this person said that, that is not a good reason to bring somebody else into the conversation. Unless if it's a post-mortem and the idea is to gather information and then present findings, that's a little bit different. But if the goal is just to be a agile spy, yeah, that's not a good reason to have an outsider run the things. Okay, Nanga pulls into the top spot, followed by Mariana, guest 304, Lopo, and I think we got Ashley down below there. Very good. What is a reason Mark gave for using different retro formats? Is it because the locus of control will result in more diversity of opinions? Different formats will resonate with different team members. Sailboats are fun to draw. People don't fall asleep. It's more fun. The teams will be more objective and less threatened by a new format. And yes, different formats will resonate with different team members. That was the reason we gave for it. Some of these I just made up a bunch of words. But yeah, and sailboats are fun to draw. But the reason for using different formats will resonate with different team members. And B. Johnson takes the lead again, followed by Nanga, Ashley, and Alyssa. Okay, let's see. Do we have one more? Okay. What does Mark say every retrospective should have? So there was something I said, make sure your retrospective has this. It's very, very valuable. Was it Twix, alcohol, Kudos, heavy management presence, a Scrum Master present, or the Agile Manifesto? I think pizza is a great idea too. But what did I mention in the talk as being something that every retrospective should have? And yes, Kudos, right? I think Twix are great to have. I think it's interesting that 4% of us voted for alcohol. That is not what I said we needed to have at at our retrospective. But your retrospectives may be a little bit different than mine. Maybe that's necessary there. But yes, Kudos. Having Kudos is something you absolutely want to have. Is some way for people to recognize how each other are getting things done. Jude points out that we might get more participation. Yes, there are certain corporate controls sometimes that might prevent that, but you're welcome to try that, I guess. You might come up, it might make it to where people speak up that normally wouldn't speak up, but they also might say things that maybe they shouldn't be saying. Truth serum, yes. Okay, it looks like, we've got, looks like B. Johnson and Nanga both got 5,000 points. So both of you got the top spot. So I will give, well, you know what? Hang on. That's really, really close. Okay. All three of you guys, I will send all three of you guys t-shirts. So take a screenshot, send it to me, and let me know what t-shirt size you want. They're Gillen, I think, just regular unisex t-shirts. So let me know what size you want and your address, and I will get these headed to you. We'll do 3 winners. It's close, neck and neck there. So thank you all for participating. And let's see, I think about one more thing here. There we go. Okay. So I'd love to get your feedback. As a matter of fact, a lot of the things I changed in this from, I think last time I did this was 2 or 3 years ago. I went back through the feedback again and said, okay, what did people say they want to see more of and less of, and made some tweaks to try to improve it. So if you can fill this out, it's very, very valuable to me. I'd really appreciate it because it helps me make it better 2 years from now if I do this again. So thank you all for coming. I'll stick around for a few more minutes if anybody wants to chat. Hope to see you next week when we're going to be talking about work in progress. Oh, good. I'm glad you got your book, Jin Long.
Thank you, Mark. I got it. Thank you.
All right.